Hi, it's Nigel here, and welcome to another Saturday Brunch episode from the Sunday Lunch Project. Today we talk to Paul Bedford, the cybersecurity guy, and he'll tell us all the things we need to worry about as PMs in this scary world. Enjoy. Today I'd like to welcome to the Saturday Brunch podcast Paul Bedford, who is a lead cybersecurity business analyst. And he's protecting global corporations' customer data, finances, and assets from cyber
And that's
attacks.
a great strap line, isn't it? Don't you think?
It is indeed.
Yes.
Paul has been working with companies like Burberry and nPower and Shell and Capgemini over the years. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Great to talk to, Nige, and it's super duper to be on this podcast.
Brilliant. So, as we discussed earlier, I kind of wanted to find out from you the kind of things that you think from your role as looking after that assets and data from a point of view of an organization, what the listenership, which is primarily project managers, what sort of things they should be thinking about, what gotchas there are, etc. So it's kind of over to you, and I will ask stupid questions all the way through.
Hey, look, ask as many stupid questions as you like. Do you mind if I tell you that it is a stupid question when you ask it, though? Is that all right?
We've known each other long enough that you know.
People say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I think there is.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I'm joking. Yeah. So what? I've been a project manager myself in the past, and one of the things I found about being a project manager was that everybody blames you when it all goes tits up, but no one gives you the credit when it's all gone really well. In fact, it's very rare that people go, "Oh, you're on budget, well done," and "Oh, you delivered it on time, that's fantastic." It's expected, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I've been a business analyst as well. And obviously, through all of the projects over time in the last 15 years, there's been the cybersecurity angle. But what I've actually noticed of over the last 5 years is that has intensified something, beyond all proportions.
Yeah.
And there's good reason for that intensification of security awareness in a project. And capturing the requirements. And one of the things I found with a lot of project managers is that sometimes security is just left as a kind of addendum in the non-functional requirements right at the end, because you get all the business requirements. It's all, you got to do this business, this, and you go through a whole raft of business requirements, and then there's the non-functionals. And I don't know if you found this, but have you noticed that the non-functionals are very rarely looked at until you're about to go live, and then they say, "Well, have you done this and have you done that and I've done the other?" And they go, "Oh my goodness, there's a lot of work in those non-functional requirements." So
yeah, I know what you mean on that. Yeah, you can see it's kind of, and sometimes it has to be at the end, because that's the only some of it is proving that it works rather than
absolutely.
You can't. Sometimes you can't. You can design it and think about it, but actually some of those penetration type testing things you can only actually do at the end, and some of those gotchas only pop out then because you just don't know that they're there.
They can cause delays, and I used to kind of like roll my eyes at security people when they come out this raft of requirements. You're thinking, "Oh my goodness, why didn't they mention this 6 months ago when we first started doing the requirements for the entire project? Why have they brought this up now?" And now, thankfully, I think project managers need to shift their thinking, and the thinking between every project that you deliver should be security by design. That right at the inception, everything should be looking at security right from day one. The very first time you get into a business requirements meeting, security by design should be there. And let's talk about why this is really important for project managers. So in 2018, we're aware of data breaches, aren't we? There's been a whole plethora of them. I mean, massively public breaches. You look at 2018, and the average fine for someone who violated, who had a data breach and leaked millions of records of information that was personal data onto the dark web for sale to all these villains was about £350,000. And you got classic examples like Carphone Warehouse, who were done for 350k, and Talk who were done at about 400k. They changed the law, as you know, in 2000, at the end of 2018, and it then became pretty much an unlimited fine. It was £20 million or 4% of your annual turnover. Now, if you're quite a big company, the first company to fall for this, well, not fall for it, but to actually suffer a breach was British Airways. And that was the first one in 2019. And that cost them a fine of £183 million. Now,
jeez,
that's a shitload of cash. And that is small compared to some of the others, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. So bear that in mind. If you're working for business at British Airways and you put a system out there on the internet and it gets breached and British Airways gets charged £183 million, do you think as a project manager who delivered that project, there's going to be no ramifications for you at all?
Yeah, I think there might be the odd. It'd be in your feedback at least, wouldn't it?
In your feedback, your appraisal. Yeah, you didn't quite do so well on that project, didn't you? So let's step it up a notch. Let's talk about Equifax. All right. Now, Equifax had a massive corporation. They had a breach that left 143 million users' details exposed, and the cost to them in stock market losses because of that breach, and it was directly linked to that breach, was $4 billion.
Was that off the value of that?
It was off the it was the cost
to their shareholders then.
Yeah, it was the fine that they had and the loss of revenue and the loss in the company value of $4 billion. That's a chunk of cash. And then you look at the record fine that happened just a little while ago of Facebook, where they had that compromise that led to the election of Donald Trump, which is amazing that can happen. Their fine was $5 billion. Now, if Mark Zuckerberg seems like a really forgiving kind of guy, do you personally? I with these, if you look at $4 billion and $5 billion, that's big boys' money. And the thing about this is they're going to hunt down how this happened, because the law says you got to stop that leak and find out how it happened in the first place and then prevent it from happening again. When they do that investigation and they find out which project led to that leak and which project manager was actually running the project, there's actually now, I'm working for Shell at the moment, which is 140,000 people around the globe. They have billions of pounds worth of projects going on simultaneously. And when I went into the induction, there was something really interesting I noticed, because I've worked at Shell twice before. And one of the things that I noticed on the induction recording that they take you through was a threat. And the threat was imprisonment for data breaches. Personal loss of freedom as a project manager or someone who actually puts something in place that leads to a breach. So, worst case scenario, now the project manager who implemented a project could actually go to prison. Unlikely, but that is a real possibility now.
I never realised that.
Absolutely, I didn't realise that. I was quite shocked. That's
so
why I did project manager.
So is that part of that GDPR?
I don't know how it came about. I think it may well be, but I know that it's definitely in the induction routine for Shell that you can go to prison if you are personally liable for data breaches or for violating the GDPR rules or anything like this. And also, if you look at it, for example, let's take Mark Zuckerberg. When he's finally tracked down the person whose fault it is, because there'll be a whole list of calamities that happen. It's normally a series of unfortunate events, isn't it? That leads to this one thing. But the project manager is the person who holds the can. That's what they do. They are responsible. There's probably someone who's accountable as well. When they find out who did that, the best case scenario is an absolute loss of credibility and maybe a demotion. The worst case scenario will be just sacked and never work in that industry again. Because what in the digital age, seriously, isn't it? If you think about it, you got LinkedIn, you got social media, you got, it's all over the internet. If you're responsible for a data breach and it gets out there that you're the person that let it all out, kind of thing, you won't work again. Not you might work in Asda or Sainsbury's.
Well, I don't know.
Stacking shelves, tins
I
of
don't
bins.
know. My immediate thought there was I was thinking Wolf of Wall Street. So you end up making
You could go to
that
prison
as,
and make a movie and make millions of pounds.
yeah,
But
that's
think
the
about going to
other way
prison
around.
there. It's not
Yeah.
much fun. I don't
Yeah, I'm not sure
fancy
about the
prison
prison
myself.
bit of it, but you know what I
No,
mean. It's kind of like
I know what you
get
mean.
you get on the speaker circuit talking about
You can
how you
actually,
manage to mess it up.
turn tragedy into yeah, that's right. So
But yeah,
looking
I
at
did the seriousness of that, of the prison time type thing. It kind of, that means it's very much aligned with the health and safety kind of law, where
yeah,
you've got the unlimited jurisdiction there when you are found to be in breach of that. And I suppose, I imagine with the data thing that the thinking behind that is, if someone is flagrantly disregarding the processes and
yeah.
just, you know, I mean, with malice or with intent, then you could understand why that kind of thing would be put forward. But hopefully, where someone is just, as you say, a series of unfortunate events and making errors.
Yes,
Then
you would hope that they're not going to be
think
that
it would be
harsh.
slightly different.
Yeah, you would hope so, wouldn't you? But the problem is sometimes as a project manager, there's so much on your plate. You're juggling so much. There's deadlines.
Yeah.
You put together a draft plan that suddenly becomes the deadline, and this is this is the real plan you got to deliver to. And when you go over that,
the draft.
it was a
Yeah.
draft plan. These are estimates. You know what I mean? They push and push and push to get dates, and once you get those dates, and then you change them, there's a lot of pressure, isn't there? And it's very easy.
The great one in that is where you put the PowerPoint slide, which has the high level plan, and then behind
Yes.
it the risks and
The
assumptions
caveats,
associated with it, and they never get any further than when you send it. And next time you see that, it's in another deck with none of those items.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of pressure, and I've seen project managers crack nearly under that pressure of delivering, and it's very easy when you're under that pressure to try and sweep things under the carpet. And if some guy comes along with 500 security controls that you're supposed to implement at the last minute, which is what has been happening, then things can get missed.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to mention a couple of things that as a project manager you should be thinking about. So the first fundamental thing is that security by design, right from the start. Yeah, no longer is security an afterthought. Security is something that is serious, and there are a lot. It's not a question of, is a company going to suffer a data breach now? It's a question of, when is it going to suffer a data breach, and how can you minimize the impact of that data breach? What can you do to make things, no company is unhackable.
Yeah.
With AI, artificial intelligence, I just put that in there. You've got to get the AI angle into this. As that's maturing, machine learning, as that's maturing, as artificial intelligence is maturing, almost passwords are becoming null and void, because if you've got a password that contains a normal word that's in the dictionary, it can be cracked in minutes, even if it's a string of words. That's on a side line to this. But you think of AI and how it's evolving, you will be hacked. And so what you want to do as a project manager is put as many controls in place in your software so that it makes it just not worth the effort to do.
Yeah.
And that's the key. So that, you put people off by putting a lot of controls in there and stopping them from doing it. And so one of the fundamental shifts in project management over the last 5 years is software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. And that is very dangerous, because I think there needs to be a little bit of education with project managers, because they almost think, and I've been guilty of this as well, is they always think if it's a software as a service, well, you're not responsible for any of the security. It's all on the cloud supplier. Well, there's a couple of things to think about here. First of all, there should be a supplier assurance process. a list of the criteria that your supplier should meet as a minimum. Now, obviously, if it's Amazon Web Services or a Microsoft Azure, then you would have to hope that they've got all that in place.
Well, yeah, I think it's that thing, isn't it? Is if you're for the base layer of what you're doing there, it's for an organization of that size, it's not unreasonable for any company to say, well, we would expect them to have better controls than you could implement yourself in your own data center.
And that's the glory of it, isn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah. Whereas Paul Bedford's software as a service in his shed in Warwickshire, you could probably want to do a bit more due diligence there, wouldn't you?
Hey, look, it's a big shed. All right. So really important point here is supplier. If you're dealing with a company that is not necessarily a massive company, then there should be definitely a supplier assurance process in there where you look at their security and how they deal with it. Give you an example of that. Just recently, as you know, I've worked for lots of companies. I won't name the company this happened to because obviously it's revealing things about them. But they got a third-party supplier in to do a lot of a phishing exercise, and we went through a whole RFI, RFP. We really went through thoroughly everything. We got a contract. We nailed it down really tight, and they were rolling out this phishing exercise. And we'd done one exercise where we'd given them through a secure portal, and that's something that's really important. If you're going to exchange data with external third parties, it's got to be through an encrypted, secure portal. Never send them on email because it's too easy, and never send them unencrypted or not password protected. So beside that, so we were exchanging emails. They'd done the first phishing attempt, and it was very successful. We came 3 months later to do the next one, and it was a test one. The first one was. So this one we basically did to about 10,000 people rather than just 2,000 people. So it was a bigger rollout of the phishing. And interesting, and we were about to hand over all this data to the supplier of the phishing service, and they just happened to mention on a call their third party partner company that does the phishing on their behalf. Now, you might, and we just all sat there as cybersecurity people and said, hang on, and we had to freeze their contract and then do a due diligence, find out who this third party was, because it wasn't mentioned in the contract anywhere. They'd forgotten to mention this. And we had to do a whole supplier assurance on this third party. And they were actually in breach of contract and they were going to be taken to court. Thankfully, that third party was cleared. But you've got to look at the third parties that you're using and suppliers that you're using, and making sure that they're not giving out your data to anybody else as well. So if you're on a project, that's the important thing to think about. Another really important thing to think about, even though the cloud, if you're doing like a Microsoft, an AWS or Microsoft Azure, where it's a massive corporation and they're dealing with all the back end stuff for you, which is fantastic, you still have a lot to do.
Oh yeah,
because
your config, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So 64% of all breaches are done by internal staff. 64%. And that's 64%. Them. Yeah, exactly. That's a huge amount. That's why educating people about anti-phishing emails and stuff like that is really important, because when we've done phishing tests in the past, so let's pretend there's a sideline here. If you send out a phishing test to 10,000 people, Nigel, in an educated company where you've been given them education about don't click on links, you idiots, what as a percentage, how many would you expect to click on the link?
I'm guessing it's higher than it should be, so I would say 60%.
No, thank God it's not that high, Nigel. It was 25% though.
It's still high, isn't it?
1 in 4 people clicked on the link and then got caught out. That's staggeringly high. But you can understand why they do it. I mean, I've had emails and I thought, oh, that's from HMRC. And then I've actually checked with HMRC and it hasn't been, but it looks really, really convincing. So if you think about it, that 64% of breaches happen because of people, in the organization, then the configuration side of if you're running a software as a service project is really important. And it's all about the CIA. And I'm not talking about the American organization that busts criminals here. We're talking about the things you need to consider are confidentiality. What level of security is this data that's being held? You've got to look at integrity of that data. So how does that data stay clean, and how do you prevent it being compromised? And you've also got to look at the availability of. So I'm going to talk about the CIA as I go through like a little list of things that project managers should consider when they're running these kind of projects. And in fact, they apply to all projects, but I think they're more important when you're doing with a SaaS, because people forget that the SaaS only provide the platform. You've got to do the rest. And that's really important distinction to make. So let's have a quick talk a bit about confidentiality. So as another little sideline here. So I thought about this the other day. I've just moved house, as I said, and we didn't have a fridge because it wasn't an integrated fridge. So we had the opportunity to go out and buy one of these massive American fridges, which I've always wanted. And it's amazing. And I bought this fridge, cost me £1,400 for a fridge. God, yeah. I could. That's how much I paid for my car. No, it isn't really. I'm joking. But it does, it does ice. It does crushed ice. It does cold water. It alarms when you got the door open for too long. It's really great, and it's Wi-Fi enabled. Right. So I can hook my fridge up to my Wi-Fi. How amazing is that?
Does it? Is there a reason to?
Exactly. So that's my point here. Okay. We want to reduce, on any project, try and reduce the attack surface as much as you possibly can. The more with the Internet of Things right now, pretty much you can connect anything to the internet. Yeah. And that might sound like a good thing, but the more points you expose to the internet and to possible hackers, the more ways there are of getting in. And the interesting thing is, I've recently, one thing that shocked me was that if you're dealing with most confidential data, they tell you not to use the video conferencing facilities that are in every single meeting room in Shell. Oh, wow. Because they've all got IP addresses.
Right.
And the problem is there's no standards across the globe for a fridge's security protection to enable it to be not hackable.
Yeah.
And the fridge example sounds really silly, but let's imagine this scenario. Let's pretend you're actually running a project for the NHS, and you've got thousands of fridges, and it seems like a great idea to have them all connected up. Because imagine the benefits of having an automated fridge for the NHS that keeps track of all the stuff in it and it reorders them when you need them, and it's all internet connected. But who does the due diligence on the global standard for fridges across the world to make sure that it's not hackable?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So,
yeah.
So got to look at, when you're looking at a project, you've got to not only look at software, but look at the hardware that you're implementing as well. And hardware is a lot less protected than software, in my opinion. There's a lot of global standards out there, for the role-based access and controls and all the things you're supposed to put in place. But you look at all the different fridges out there, and I guarantee there isn't a single British standard that covers them all for Wi-Fi.
No, there won't be one.
It's just a silly example, but you can see what I mean there by just watch out for little gotchas like that. So confidentiality is really important. Integrity of data, and so if you're dealing with a SaaS or any application, you're going to come across role-based access, and it's really important, essential in fact, that you get this role-based access right. and also segregation of duties. So one of the things that project managers should be thinking about when they're gathering requirements for a project is, first of all, role-based access, who can do what, and segregation of duties. Now, a while ago, you'll remember this, Nigel, when they wanted to simplify things, and so it's a great idea to raise a help desk, a service desk request to get access to about 10 different systems, and then you get all them all granted at the same time. And if you go into a system, you could pretty much if you're an admin person, you could pretty much do anything you wanted in that system. I used to have admin privileges. I stopped wanting that. It's just too much responsibility. But the problem with having admins is that they're too powerful. And so, for example, I mean, you could have an admin person who has access to raising invoices in a system, but also the payments of those invoices.
Yeah.
And that lockily is a massive security threat. And so when you're thinking about this role-based access, not only do you need to think about, so you've got to lock people down to the minimum, the maximum that they need. So read only as much as you possibly can. If it's not relevant to their job, don't give them any access at all to that area of the software as a service. It's really important. Also, if you've got a possibility of someone being able to create a user and then give that user permissions, those two should be absolutely separate. And the reason why those two should be separate roles is because it's a lot more difficult. If someone wants to create a fake user ID for this system and then give them permissions to get payments and do all that other stuff, if they have to then collude with someone else, it makes
another barrier.
A lot more secure. And so when you're looking at confidentiality and integrity, you got to look at role-based access as a really important thing to implement. Look at another thing as well is look at software updates. Now, SaaS has software updates as well, but also if you've got an on-premise solution, you're going to have some sort of way of updating your software. But it's a security. There's a couple of things to be aware of here. Is the normal. You come across this, I'm sure, Nigel, in your projects, the fact that it's if you upgrade as the new patch comes out, it can actually make things worse and unstable.
Yeah.
And so having kind of what we call an N-1 patching policy, where you're always kind of one behind, and you make sure that they've fixed all the bugs in the patch and they haven't accidentally introduced new security flaws.
There's a tension there though as well, isn't there? Because you get the latest patch that comes, say it's your desktop and you've got Microsoft's latest patch coming out. That latest patch might be a security fix that you need to fix because you've got and it's kind of like, well, I can't do that yet because I need to wait and make sure and you've kind of got that tension of
the catch-22 situation, isn't it?
You need to keep yourself as up to date with all the security patches. It's like with me with my phone, I just leave it on to do it.
Yes.
Update them, leave it doing. Most of my apps I do that, and the same with my own personal PCs. I just leave them to go through and take the earliest patch because there'll be better guns. Yes, fair enough. Some of the guns they put on there won't work as well to protect me, but they'll be better than what was there, is my theory. But and that's in a personal scenario. It's not so bad.
As a personal user, I would say that's exactly right.
Whereas
a bit more difficult in a corporate, though, isn't it? Yeah.
If you've got, like you said, 120,000 users, let the patch roll out to everyone. Suddenly, no one can work. Even if it's for an hour, the cost to the business for that hour is massive.
Tremendous, isn't it? It really adds up.
Billions of dollars you start losing.
Yeah.
So and then if you've got one of those devices, you'll let them patch that is running a system rather than just being used by a user. That breaks down, and again, a monitoring system in Shell, I imagine, would be something that would be using what is. Then you've got the potential massive danger. I can see why you need to do that.
Absolutely.
But it's whatever fits the right thing.
Yeah, certainly is. And so that talks about the confidentiality and integrity part. But another thing that's really important that a lot of people forget is data storage and retention, and putting rules around when is this when does this data become irrelevant, and
Yeah.
when can it be removed? Because when you're rolling out a software as a service platform, initially, obviously there's no data. Well, you'll have a data migration probably, but there's probably not a massive amount of data on there initially. But when you're working in a corporation where there's 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees, 100,000 employees, suddenly, if you're retaining stuff and never ever deleting it,
Yeah.
you end up with petabytes of storage, which costs billions of pounds a year to keep. And so having some sort of data storage policy and making sure that when you implement this project, that, obviously you've got to look at the legal and regulatory laws. If you some data you'll need to keep for 7 years, then remove. Others, I actually came across one the other day that you have to keep the data for 21 years.
Bleeding hell.
That's great, isn't it? A child could grow up and get to their 21st birthday before that data becomes irrelevant. I think that was a legal requirement from the US, which is quite funny. Bless them. So look at your data storage and retention. That's a really important thing to look at as well. And also audit logging, being able to track and making sure that if someone changes the data and there's someone who's hacked in and they're doing stuff, being able to catch them and being able to prove who did what is really, really important.
Right.
I worked for a little. This sounds really daft, but I worked for a company a little while ago, and this company, they turned off the auditing on one particular system, and they turned off the auditing on one system because it was absolutely huge, and there were millions of people doing. There was millions of things being done every single day, and it was costing them a fortune to keep this audit trail. Well, guess what happened? So, they had a breach and they couldn't prove a thing. And so it was a complete false economy because of the fines that they got. So you got to make sure that the audit logging is put on. And if you can't audit everything, you got to audit the important stuff. The finance stuff. Anywhere where there's personally identifiable information, you got to watch that stuff like a hawk nowadays. Because GDPR is very, very hot on personal information. So one of the things that we do with all applications in a project in Shell is that every single project pretty much gets what's called a business impact assessment. And the business impact assessment goes through looking at things like, does this application hold private information? What kind of private information does it hold? We also do a legal and regulatory assessment where we look at all of the laws around if you think of Shell, it's in 140,000 employees in pretty much every country in the world.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, the legal and regulatory assessments for those projects that are going global is bloody complicated.
Yeah.
And just keeping an eye on all that is really difficult.
And I imagine some of the rules are conflicting as well.
Yes, absolutely. So you have to be able to segregate different countries.
Yeah.
And I did a rollout for HSBC a little while ago. That was a 2-year rollout of a web platform where we created a system that enabled a business person in a country to be able to open up to 20 business banking accounts in 20 different countries simultaneously without duplicating all the questions. Now, that was incredible. The complexity of that was immense because obviously, as you can imagine, the theory is you can open up bank accounts in 20 countries, but really it's actually against international law to open bank accounts where, for example, there's an embargo from one country to another.
And those change, I guess.
They do change all the time, yeah. So we had to design a system that would basically have a matrix that was referred to every time someone wanted to open a bunch of business accounts. It won awards, that did. Got global recognition. Wow. I didn't get the awards. I didn't get to the dinner either. But hey, that's what you get when you just sat behind the scenes delivering the stuff rather than the figurehead. So, okay. So let's have a look. What else should we talk about? Yeah, so I've got a little list here that I'm going to go through. So controls. So we talked about access management already. We talked about software updates, which is great. Talked about data storage. Yeah, so here's an interesting thing as well. If you're dealing with a project, not only have you got it, so as you can imagine, if you're looking at a global corporation, now, for example, Burberry, they had a lot of top secret fashion designs that they keep on a system. And if you're keeping, so that there's a couple of things that you could have in that. You could have technically sensitive information. So you could have designs for new technologies or products or services that are going to revolutionize your industry. But also what you could have is competitive sensitive information. Like, for example, if you're working at Burberry, obviously the next next catwalk run is vitally important. And you're working with hundreds and hundreds of people with lots of different types of software to get this catwalk run done, and a breach or any kind of security flaw when you're running those kind of projects, it could be catastrophic. And so one of the things you should consider when you're actually running a project is, does this solution that I'm implementing, does it contain any competitively sensitive information, or does it contain any technical information? Because interestingly enough, if you go from one country with a laptop that has technically sensitive information on it, and you walk into another country, the rules of some countries say that you just introduced some new technology into that country that's not been tried or tested in that country, and you can get arrested for it.
Jeez.
You know that? That's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, that's crazy stuff. And so interesting. So you've got to bear these things in mind if you're running really big projects around the world. That things change from country to country, and you can't just send top secret information from one country to another without actually checking whether there's restrictions, which is really, really important to do. So competitive sensitive information is really important as well. And it's really important. Segregation of duties comes into there as well. So watch out for that from a legal perspective. So let me just see what else I want to talk about here. Yeah, okay. So this sounds, and I'm hoping that any project manager who's worth their salt, always knows about this. But you've got to look at your backup and restore nowadays. It's really important. So, and also make sure that when you deliver that project, that when you hand it over, that there's some sort of business continuity plan, or even a disaster recovery plan. When I was at Burberry, it was really interesting because we got this service transition guy in, because one of the things that the project managers wanted to do was to get it into live and then just ditch it. And I found that there's no incentive for a project manager once he's delivered or she's delivered the project to then monitor it for 6 to 8 months and fix things. Yes, sometimes you have your hypercare period, but once that hypercare period is done, there's no real handover. Have you found this yourself, Nigel?
Yeah, I have, yeah. And I've seen it. I've seen it both ways, really, where you've got, and it's understandable because you've got your triple constraints of you delivered what you said you would. Is it in time, and have you spent the money on it? And that money thing is, once you spent the money, once you run out the money, you're not getting any money for it.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't support it as a charity, can you?
Yeah. But I have seen that there's less, from my experience, there's less likelihood of someone just lobbing it over the wall and running away these days. In organizations where you're working together, because you're getting more blended sort of delivery organizations with the advent of the DevOps type stuff. Everyone feels more there feels more like, I suppose it's a hark back to how IT was even before I got in it, where you would have the person who wrote it fixed it anyway, the person who wrote it looked after it anyway, and it was that kind of dual responsibility, so you didn't have that, and you didn't have the walls that were built up in between in the interests of project delivery success and service management success. And I think you've it's changed. It is changing a lot more, I think, and I think project managers are in a, I think more, that's my own personal view, we tend to be in a position of, not only is it a successful lob it over the wall, is that you've got a project that people are personally who are really happy to be using. Exactly. And like I've done rollouts before now, and I'm chat to people about the positives of what it's done even now, because I was proud that it did make some difference to people who were using it. And I think certainly from my experience of project managers I work with, that's more the mentality nowadays.
Yeah. So with that, so we when we were at one particular company, the program manager was fed up of project managers, almost lobbing it over the fence, when actually it's probably partly his fault because of the way he ran programs. He got a service transition guy in who was a pain in the ass. He was awful. However, he kicked butt, and he made sure that the business continuity plans were in place, the disaster recovery plans were in place, and that the business as usual people were not pissed off that we just dumped this on them and ran. And he's worth his weight in gold.
Yeah, and that service transition job is brilliant, because it's that person who has to have a foot in both camps. And the best ones that I've worked with, and I've worked with some brilliant service transition and introduction guys who are fully supportive of delivering the project and fully protective of the service when it's BAU. And that's what that, and you have I've worked with some guys who are completely one end of the road of trying to protect too much, and at the other end of trying to deliver as if they were not caring about it. And the guys I've worked with, girls and guys I've worked with, have sat right in the middle, being really pragmatic, really good at delivering what the organization needs, not just their department.
Yeah. So two final things, Nige, if you've got time. One of the things that, if you've got a software as a service, if you're running a software as a service project, imagine this. If you think about it, really, you can actually just go into a web browser anywhere, type in your username and your password, and you're in to that software as a service. Now, thankfully, companies are moving away from that model right now, because that's a massive security vulnerability, massive. So if you've got a software as a service, two things should be put in place, one or the other. If you can put both, fantastic. Make sure that the software as a service is only accessible through a VPN, a company VPN, or multi-factor authentication. In fact, make sure if you can at all, multi-factor authentication is fantastic.
About 3 years ago, I was at Google on a training course.
Wow, cool.
And it was in Gay Paris. It was lovely. It was really good.
Nice.
And one of the first things the guys there, and they were talking about their cloud service and all that stuff. That's what it was, a training course on that. And the thing the guy said at the beginning, whatever you do, switch on two-factor authentication.
Yes.
That was it.
Absolutely.
And he said, do it all the time. Switch on two-factor authentication.
It's a pain in the ass, but you've got to do it. I've got a statistic here for you, Nige. So one of the projects I ran for one of the companies I've been in recently was a global rollout of multi-factor authentication. And interesting enough, the technology side of things was actually quite easy, but it was the communication and the letting people know it's coming and making sure they actually registered their devices that was the most time-consuming thing ever. However, the reward of that was that before we started this project, they were having 200 hacked accounts a month. 200 a month, yeah? And they had about 12,000 employees, so it's not a massive company. We got that down to 4 a month. Jeez. Just by implementing MFA. MFA is the way you can use email as a way, or a text message, or not just, or facial recognition, all those kind of things, rather than just two-factor. So
I found that these things pop up now, and it just makes as soon as they say they've got that, it's kind of like, oh, that's good. Yeah, I'll use that.
Exactly. The funny thing is, I found multi-factor authentication really irritating until I got into cybersecurity. And now I've enabled it on everything I possibly can.
Yeah.
And
I get the same.
if I use a service that doesn't have MFA,
Yeah.
and if the project managers on this call don't get anything else out of this call, I would suggest that if you have an interface that is web facing where people can log into it, MFA, you've got to do it 100% of the time. Integrate it somehow. It's got to be done, because it will gets rid of 98% of the hacks. That's one thing to do. That's the thing to do.
Brilliant.
Cool.
You had one other
that's all
point.
I wanted to talk about.
Well, I thought there was one other point.
It was
That's
VPN.
brilliant.
VPN was the other point.
Ah, right. I see.
So
Brilliant.
So really, if you can restrict your software to just available on the company VPN, that'd be really good.
Yeah,
and one thing
you've got to have a decent. In all likeliness, your VPN will have a lot of protection on there. Obviously, it's encrypted as a tunnel, and then the weakness becomes the VPN that you've implemented. So that's one big potential weakness, I suppose, rather than lots of little weaknesses that are out there in the clear.
Yes, and I think the final thing I think to cover is availability for software as a service. And they quote these 99.9999% uptime, but we were caught out on that because that was and the software kept going down, and it kept going down for like hours a day. This is our SSO software.
Was it planned outage by any chance?
No, there's no planned outages. No, what it was that 99.9999% applied to their cloud offering, not the on-prem offering. And we had an on-prem offering, and therefore, obviously, the on-prem offering wasn't as 99.999%.
Jeez.
Because it kept going down, and also the bit that they were guaranteeing wasn't the bit that kept going down; it was another bit. So just watch out for these, high availability scores, and do a bit of research, read around the subject. Just make sure that you understand that all of the components are covered, and that if you get two that interact, and can they collapse the entire system? Because it's happened to us before. And it happened to us with multi-factor authentication, which is quite important.
Yeah, it's the last thing you want. Yeah, it's the last thing.
Yeah, and it was set to fail to open, because you can't really. Yeah, you got no choice with that, unfortunately, because if you got a VP and they're trying to get a delivery, they're trying to get something done, and suddenly your MFA service goes down, and to block them causes a lot of political crap.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about like high up people, VPs, and big CEOs and stuff like that, they're always the ones who are last to be MFA'd.
Yeah.
Incorporated into any MFA program. But they're the ones that are going to be targeted the most in a corporation.
Well, they've got the biggest access.
Whale fishing. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's it. You catch one of those extremely senior members of the organization.
But you're minted, mate.
Yeah. They can really make a big influence. Wow. Paul, that was absolutely fascinating.
Hopefully that's been useful.
Yeah, it was.
It was. Great to talk to you, Nigel.
I learned stuff, and I'm sure that everyone listening has learned stuff.
Well, you know what? If you've learned stuff, Nigel, I'm quite impressed. You know an awful lot.
Thank you very much.
I've worked for you. I've known Nigel in the past. I worked for Nigel ages ago. Yeah, when we were young and gorgeous. Yeah, well, maybe just young. Well, younger.
Unfortunately, I've still kept my looks.
You have. Yeah. I've lost all my hair. I've lost the looks. I lost my virginity. I've lost everything.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you, mate. If people want to continue this conversation with you, what's the best way for them to grab hold of you?
I just look me up on LinkedIn. It's Paul J. Bedford. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I got 14,000 connections. So if you want to have a chat about anything, always up for a chat. And anytime, just send me a connection request. But please, if you send me a connection request, don't do it on your mobile, because it just sends a connection request with no explanation. Probably best to do it on a desktop. There is a way of doing it on your mobile, but it's a bit long-winded. But send me an introduction saying, look, I listened to the podcast with Nige. I'd like to connect if that's okay. And I'll go, yes.
Brilliant. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. You have a fantastic rest of the week. And
yes, I will, mate.
Like I say, I'll let you know when this goes out. Thanks,
awesome.
Mate.
Great to talk to you, buddy.
Cheers, now. Bye.
Bye.
I'm sure you really enjoyed that interview with Paul. He's an entertaining and really informative guy, and I think he's given us some real good tools there to lessen our sleepless nights. And all I say to me is have a great day and don't have nightmares. One thing I forgot to mention when I recorded the outro for this is that you can still buy Project Management, the sketches, and when I were project manager, it's now the 14th. You can get them from Amazon and they will be arriving before Christmas. So if you're stuck for a Secret Santa present or just a silly present for someone, pop along to those. There's a link in the show notes. Cheers now. Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.